Great, that's a relief. I'd like to welcome you all to the Sea Scotland conference this evening and the launch of the Young Sea Changers Scotland Manifesto. Delighted to see so many people here and lots of young people, and don't feel bad if you're old like me because you're still welcome. Okay. Young at heart. I'm Claudia Beamish, Chair of Young Sea Changers Scotland and an Honorary Fellow of the Scottish Environment Link. And I'm here tonight to help proceedings to run smoothly and for everyone to have an informative, enjoyable and adventurous evening. So let's go for that. This is the first ever ocean hustings in Scotland. And it is actually part of a series of annual conferences which have been running since 2016 to explore and share and push forward progressive policies and management for our marine environment and our coastal communities. And it is fundamentally important now, of course, because of the Holyrood elections in 2016 next year. And the aim of the night is to really hone in on these policies that we can encourage our politicians to take forward, not before time, I may say, having been a politician myself in the past. It's halfway in the decade of oceans between 2020 and 2030, and there's only 5 years to go before a lot of the commitments that have made and haven't honoured, and some that we have in Scotland, really need to be implemented and properly monitored. So tonight is of real significance, and thank you all very much for coming. So a couple of housekeeping and safety arrangements. Not expecting a fire drill, and you would just depart the building via the nearest exit, then congregate at the front courtyard of the building. So let's hope that no fire alarm goes. And the nearest exits are by the conference room door for the back rows and at the side of the room for the front doors. I feel I should be like somebody in Ryanair going, you should take a look. Okay, so very importantly, we thank our sponsors, Scottish Power Renewables, Scottish Wildlife Trust, Young Sea Changers Scotland and WWF, without which this event would not be possible. And I want to hand over in a minute to are you a director or are you the chief executive or what are you? Director. Of Young Sea Changers Scotland. And for those of you that don't know, we are a charity, and I speak as the chair of that, as well as your chair for this evening, empowering young people with the knowledge, skills and confidence to speak up about our marine environment and to effect change and to connect with policymakers. And we're in our third year of existence now. So I'm going to hand over to Alan and ask him to come up and launch our youth manifesto. I can't help myself from smiling because it's such an exciting moment, and you're all here to share it with us. So over to you, Alan. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, and for those who don't know me, I'm Alan Monroe. I'm the founder and director of Young Sea Changers Scotland, and I'm delighted and actually honoured to be here this evening to take part in this Sea Scotland Ocean Hustings, to be a partner and also a sponsor of tonight's event. As Claudia mentioned, tonight's a very special night for us as an organisation because we're launching the first ever Youth Manifesto for Scotland Seas, copies of which are available at the front desk. If you haven't picked up one, please do, also available on the website. I just want to say this manifesto is the result of listening to young people across the country, from coastal communities to inland towns, who care deeply about the health of our oceans. And our core message is simple but urgent. Young people are calling on political leaders to step up for our seas before it's too late. Why? I think I'm perhaps talking to the converted here, but because healthy seas are the foundation of life. They support our climate, our communities, and our future. Yet we see them under alarming pressure from pollution, climate change, and human activities. Nevertheless, policy action to address these challenges has been slow and piecemeal. That's why our manifesto sets out key priorities for the next Scottish Government, practical, ambitious steps that reflect the voices of and concerns of Scotland's youth. And these are not just ideas that have been plucked out of a policy brief or a policy paper. These are these are asks that are based on lived experience of hopes and demands from a generation growing up amidst a climate and biodiversity crisis. So their message to politicians today is: act now to safeguard our seas for future generations. This is a chance for you all to lead with courage and vision. So our call to action for political leaders and for candidate political leaders, we ask you to pledge to include young people's priorities in your own party manifestos and to take concrete steps to protect Scotland's seas if you are elected in the next Parliament. And for the young people in the audience, and I know there are many of you here, and I'm really delighted to have so many of you here this evening, I invite you to share this manifesto with your elected representatives and your candidate representatives. Raise your own voices and demand action for a healthy marine future. This is not just about policies. For me and for young people, this is about justice. It's about ensuring that decisions that politicians make today do not rob tomorrow or your generation's opportunities to live with thriving seas and all the other opportunities that can provide. So I guess I'll finish by saying on behalf of Young Sea Changers Scotland, I just want to thank everybody here for your support. By standing with us, you're not only helping to protect Scotland's marine environment, you're also championing the voices of Scotland's young people, ensuring that they're heard in the decisions that will shape their future. So if we work together as NGOs, as industry, as young people, as politicians, we can build healthier and fairer marine future for everyone. So thank you, and please do come speak to me after this event tonight.
Thank you very much, Alan. Vision for the seas and for the communities and coastal communities and as you say, for justice for now and for the future, for the things that live in the sea and for us as well. Thank you. Great. So I'm now delighted to move to the hustings themselves, and we have a really interesting panel this evening. I just want to highlight that Tim Eagle from the Tories wasn't able to come at the last minute due to unforeseen circumstances, but we have 4 other politicians with us tonight, and I'm actually going to start by explaining what we're going to be doing, and then I'll ask politicians to introduce themselves and say something about themselves and their party's aspirations. So, due to the limited time available, and to ensure all speakers have equal speaking time, only a selection of those questions submitted by delegates will be asked during the hustings. And I think everyone's had sight of those questions beforehand, because it's not about putting people on the spot, it's about giving people time to reflect and to think about where they want to go. And we have to remember, of course, that manifestos haven't yet been formalised, and so these are very important times for politicians to be listening. And also, they probably use the word likely quite a lot, but that's fair enough, because they're not yet commitments for the Parliament, but this is a very formative time, so thank you all panellists for coming along. And all questions will be shared with the panellists and the parties after the event, all the other questions that were submitted, for parties to consider and maybe answer, we hope, the questions raised by the Sea Scotland Marine community. There's also a question box available for delegates to ask more questions. Fanny, I'm not sure where that is, but...
So it's you have a QR code at the entrance with a form, and the last question gives you space to add any questions that might come up from the discussion event.
Great, okay, thanks very much. So I'm going to suggest that in 2 minutes, each of you in turn introduce yourself and the party you represent tonight. And I'm not quite sure when the script says tonight, as if you might change. But the party you represent tonight, and state or describe either the vision of what you want for Scotland's marine environment to look like by 2030, at the end of the next parliamentary term, conveniently, or you can answer what will your party implement as a priority to ensure the recovery of Scotland's marine environment. And I think I'm going to come to Ariana Burgess first, if that's okay, MSP for Highlands and Islands, and a member of the Scottish Green Party. So over to you, about 2 minutes, thank you.
Thanks very much, Claudia. So I've been in this role since 2021, and I have been on a roller coaster learning ride about the marine space. And I just want to really thank, there's a lot of people in the room that have really helped me understand what's going on in the water and literally take me into the water. So this is me talking a little bit about me, but since I've been in this role, I've been going snorkeling, checking out the seabed, restoring oyster beds, and I Open Seas took me out on a boat where we got to see the damaged seabed. I watched the incredible film Ocean. I hope lots of you saw that. How many of you saw that film Ocean? Yeah, lots of people in the room. Really very powerful. So I've gone on this massive journey. I grew up in Edinburgh. I used to go wild swimming more than 40 years ago, maybe more than 50 years ago, just down the coast. But I didn't understand that I could do anything. I didn't understand that the sea is our seas. And so that's something that I've really started to learn in this. So what would, I'm going to kind of like fudge the two kind of questions. I say, what would our party implement? So that we've been on that journey too slow. A lot of people have already said that today. Too slow in terms of the marine protected areas, actually moving from being paper parks to actually having proper management plans. So we had the SSI come last week to Parliament for the offshore. Now what we need is the inshore. So I think that is the thing that is there. It is the low-hanging fruit that needs to move forward at pace in if not into this session, which it should have been done, certainly the next session. So the other things that I really want to see is that we really embrace that we've got this legislation, right? The Fisheries UK Act 2020, the Marine Scotland Act 2010, and a bunch of EU things. I want to see us move to an ecosystems-based approach. And I would love to see us also look at IFCAs, so that more communities, with better governance, with communities really, really at the heart of it all.
Thanks so much. Could I come to Councillor Sally Darnley, please?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Sanna Dexter-Downey. I'm a councillor in Edinburgh for the 4th Ward, and I'm also a candidate for Edinburgh Northern at the next Scottish Parliament elections. And in my previous non-political life, I spent a lot of time in this room actually, because I used to work for the University of Edinburgh. But the only time I was on this side of the room was when in 2018 we, as a university, awarded an honorary degree to Dr. Sylvia Earle, many of you will know, as extraordinary ocean advocate. So that was a really, really proud moment. And at that time I was working with colleagues at Edinburgh University to set up an international ocean leadership programme, which is now in its 6th year. We launched in 2020, and it has supported close to, I think, 50 extraordinary ocean professionals across the world, helping to make a difference and be more effective in the way that they advocate for the ocean. And knowing these people and seeing what they do really makes me quite hopeful, despite all the problems and the issues that we have. But seeing really good people doing good work and working together is something that it gives me hope. As for the Liberal Democrat approach to marine recovery, I guess, as a party we are committed to putting nature at the heart of marine policy, but we want to do that in a way that is both science-led and informed by local communities. Because we recognise that coastal communities, those who make a living from fisheries or from tourism or renewable industries, really have to have a stake and a say in what happens to their marine environments. And we believe that government should work with communities and not against them in order to get the best long-term outcomes. So one of the things that we want to see by 2030 is an expanded, an expanded, well-managed network of marine protected areas that protect at least 30% of Scotland's seas. But designation alone is not enough. We need robust enforcement and transparent monitoring delivered in partnership with local communities that are empowered to be stewards of their own marine environment.
Great, thanks very much. And I'll come to Councillor Kate Campbell now, who is Councillor for Edinburgh as well, and is SNP, if I got that right. Sorry, did I say what party you were?
Liberal Democrats.
Thanks. Okay, thanks. So over to you.
Thank you, Claudia, and good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be here. So my name's Kate Campbell. I'm the SNP councillor for Portobello, Craigmillar. I'm also the candidate next year for Holyrood for the constituency of Edinburgh, Eastern, Musselburgh and Trinent. So quite a coastal constituency and ward that I represent already. And for me, what's really important, I think crucial, is we're in this consultation phase for the National Marine Plan 2. I think making sure that we have everyone's voices heard in that the stakeholder consultation, it goes beyond consultation to real meaningful engagement, and that we can actually bring people together, that we get the spatial planning right, and that we have a real commitment, I think, to the conservation objectives that we need to put in place and how we're going to deliver them, and that we make sure that we do have, as everyone says, real concerted effort to bring proper management so that our NPAs are delivering and they're meeting international standards. The SNP has made a really big commitment to marine conservation, obviously with 37% of our seas designated as NPAs, but we do recognise that we've got further to go to make sure that the management is in place so that we are delivering that real recovery that we need for our seas. I also would like to see by the end of the next parliamentary term to make sure that we've got strengthened governance, strengthened laws around pollution, looking at all the different, we'll get into this later, I know one of the questions is about pollution, but really looking at all the different ways that we're seeing pollution coming into the seas and making sure that we're looking upstream as well as looking for removal. For me, that's about having the right regulations in place. It's also about making sure that there are the right resources in place, and this is a really good time to have this Hustings, because we're currently in the process of putting together our manifesto, and so we can feed back into that process and make sure that the priorities, that this is a learning event for me, so that the priorities we find out about here are reflected in that manifesto when it comes.
Thanks so much, Kate. And come to Councillor Conor Savage, and particularly want to thank you because as Sarah Boyack, MSP, was unwell today, Conor stepped in despite having council business till 6 o'clock. So let's be a little bit tolerant. Although he'll tell you, I'm sure, at some point about his motion for the ocean, which he probably knows something. So here we go.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Councillor Conor Savage. I represent the ward of Colton, Hoskins and Fairmount Head on the City of Edinburgh Council, and representing Scottish Labour this evening. As Claudia mentioned, I am a late substitution for Sarah. She does send her apologies. Unfortunately, she's unwell and she's very disappointed because she was very much looking forward to tonight's event. Funnily enough, actually, I was supposed to be here as an attendee, and I was very much looking forward to sitting on that side of the table, listening to the answers from the panel. So I look forward to hearing what I have to say next, I guess. My academic background is actually in marine biology. I did my bachelor's and my master's at Bangor University, specialising in the effects of climate change on the Arctic and the species that inhabit it. And whilst I've built my career in sustainable finance and more recently local politics, I'm still very active in the marine world. I sit on the UK's National Decade Committee, coordinating the UK's engagement with the UN Ocean Decade. I also head up the Early Career Ocean Professionals Programme for the UK and Europe. So there's no prizes for guessing that this is an area very close to my own heart personally. It's why my first motion, as Claudia very kindly mentioned, with the council was my motion for the ocean. So making Edinburgh the first council in Scotland to make an ocean recovery declaration, embedding it into our strategic decision-making processes, and most importantly, ensuring every child in the city, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to visit the ocean at least once whilst in primary school. In terms of Labour, the UK Labour government is proposing to extend the ban on bottom trawling to more vulnerable areas of English seas, including 41 different marine protected areas. This proposal would expand the ban on bottom trawling from 18,000 kilometres square to 48,000 kilometres square to the UK's offshore areas are already designated as protected. Scottish Labour's position runs in parallel with this, strongly support protecting our marine ecosystems and marine protected areas, emphasising the importance of doing this with local stakeholders, including local communities and the fishing industry. And we believe that high-intensity fishing should only be permitted in locations where biodiversity isn't at risk. And our position on terms of further marine protected areas and no-take zones must be monitored and implemented with stakeholder engagement as a top priority. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Conor. So now we're moving to the questions, and so we've got people in the audience who have been asked to put the questions. One or two of them have been put together from some of the a number of questions that have come in, just to try and cover as much as possible. And again, it'll be 2 minutes for each candidate with a quick warning, maybe about 30 seconds from Fanny, thanks, which I'll warn you of before the end of your opportunity to speak. So, we come to our first question, which is about climate and biodiversity targets and just transition. And I'm going to ask Adura to ask that question. Thank you, Adura.
Scotland faces the dual challenge of meeting net zero targets while restoring ocean health, yet current policy often threatens these competing goals. For example, the rapid expansion of offshore wind risks undermining biodiversity if not well planned. How will your party ensure sufficient resourcing and effective marine planning to deliver 30 by 30, balance the spatial needs of sectors like fisheries and renewables with ecological protection, and achieve both net zero and genuine marine recovery while ensuring a just transition?
Thanks very much, and it seems a bit mean to expect people to answer that in 2 minutes. But I'm sure we'll come to aspects of it that you don't mention, and if we've got time at the end, we'll come back to points that people want to pick up from other parties. So I'm going to come to you first, Sammy, for this one.
Thank you. Yeah, a huge question, but a really important one. So we all know that climate and nature crises are not separate, they are completely intertwined. And it's why that in our 2021 Scottish Manifesto, we declared a nature emergency to tackle species loss in Scotland. And it's why that DEMS want the UK to join the European Environment Agency to work together with European neighbours to tackle the nature crisis. But as for marine spatial planning, yes, our seas must be managed better to balance the protections for nature with human activities such as fishing and renewables. There's no doubt about that. Because at the moment, the marine spatial planning system that we have is haphazard. We want to see an expansion of offshore wind to help us reduce our emissions, which is also very important for the health of our ocean. But these developments are currently planned in a very uncoordinated way, which means that badly sited developments or poorly planned grid connections have the potential to do huge damage to sensitive marine environments or threaten marine wildlife and seabirds, as we all saw with the discussions around the recent case of Berwick Bank. What we need first of all, though, is better scientific knowledge, which will help us create a new marine spatial plan. Because at the moment, less than a third of the UK's EEZ, the exclusive economic zone, is mapped. We don't know what the seabed looks like in many of these places or what lives in or on it. So in order to create an effective marine spatial plan, we need to really understand what our own marine territory looks like. Yeah. So I think that's a very important step, that we need to plan our blue economy, all our industrial activities in a way that doesn't harm these important natural habitats. And having that reliable scientific information to base these decisions on will help us develop a new integrated approach informed by the science, working together with coastal and island communities, but ultimately it needs to be focused on sustainability.
Great, thanks. And I come to Marianne now.
Thanks. I think one of the things that I really started to understand is the ocean is going to be what turns around climate change for us, and that's that all the bits of science that we've got, we're really getting that understanding. And certainly when David Attenborough was talking in Ocean, he made that really clear that's the kind of a great place of hope for us. So one of the things that the Greens already did in this session is that we brought forward the Nature Restoration Fund, which was a commitment of £65 million over the time of this session, and that's rolled out an incredible amount of, and it was great actually. In 2021 I was going, there will be green and blue jobs, and actually this summer and last summer I was meeting a lot of young people in coastal communities that were actually restoring the sea, and so that fund has already kind of done a lot of buzz, but we need something more at the heart of the kind of a stronger will in that direction. I think one of the things that I want to see really is the end of bottom-towed gear. I think that's the clearest damage, and that needs to be done in a very sensitive way with the fishers who have that gear, and a kind of a process of understanding that they need to do that. The National Marine Plan 2, let's have fishing in there, let's have everybody that occupies the marine space involved in that National Marine Plan, and I would agree with Sanla's point around getting the data and being clear on the science. I think that's something that comes to the Rural Affairs Committee, that's all it gets a bit fudged at times. The other thing that I really would like to see is that we bring in no-take zones, we get clear about that, the spatial planning. So we've seen that the no-take zone at Landmash Bay is really working, so let's bring that in. We need to do that. We need to also be looking at a modern form of inshore limit, so not necessarily the 3 mile limit all the way around, because I've been having a lot of conversations with people about that, but some form of limit on the inshore so we can allow biodiversity and our fish stocks to recover.
Thanks very much, Erin. We'll come to Colin now.
Thanks very much, Colin. Thank you so much for your great questions. So Scottish Labour supports a drive to a just transition that protects jobs whilst also restoring a natural capital. And if I can just say, a just transition is so important because we've seen the impact that unjust transitions have had in the past. Probably the most notable to us all here would be with the miners and the Conservatives, as was seen during my granddad's time as a Labour councillor. So in terms of how you make that connection during just transition whilst restoring the natural capital, it means restoring Marine Scotland's capacity for joined-up planning, embedding biodiversity safeguards in offshore licensing, and investing in nature restoration alongside renewable expansion. Prioritising communities that are going to be impacted and making sure they're engaged with, whenever possible, alongside all the other key stakeholders that can and should be involved. This isn't always easy, and there are quite often clashes between different groups. But it's about finding that common ground and building solutions that work for everyone. The 30 by 30 plan to take 30% of land, 30% seas in Scotland, Scottish Labour believes that should be happening. And as a connection, it's definitely clear that without proper inshore management and restoration methods, there's no hope for offshore. So you need to make sure it's a holistic approach across the board. And we must work together to maintain both of these to ensure we have cleaner and healthier oceans for the generations to come. It's also worth highlighting the importance of the development of new offshore renewables that can add to nature restoration and limit damage to nature. To ensure we can assist with that nature recovery journey. To give you an example, implementing policies to limit negative impacts on bird and sea life is one such vital avenue. And just to close, I'd say as well, really getting this into the public consciousness about why this is important to people is why my motion for the ocean. I really did stress the importance of ocean literacy, getting this in front of people and showing the impact it can have on their lives, their communities and the nature that they live with. Thank you.
And Kate.
Thanks, Claudia. And yeah, it's a great question. And I think the thing that, I mean, it's very obvious that we need to, in order to protect the oceans, we need to stop climate change. That's very obvious. And to try and pit the two against each other is just not a helpful way or any kind of approach. So I think, again, it kind of goes back, and actually listening to everyone, I don't think any of us disagree. Perhaps we're missing the one party that might disagree with us at the table. But, you know, I think we all understand what's important, and that is that we get all of the stakeholders around the table, that we make sure there's a really clear understanding between all the different constituent groups of people who have a really strong interest in the ocean, understand the commonalities about where actually, you know, the objectives are the same or the outcomes people are looking for will actually support each other. So for me, a key part of this is about communication, it's about stakeholder engagement, it's about showing that leadership that we really need to bring everyone together. Again, I think the National Marine Plan 2 is going to be absolutely critical to this, getting the spatial planning right. But also, as has been said, making sure we have the data to back up the decisions we're taking. If we're asking people to come with us on a difficult journey or to make difficult decisions, we need to make sure that we really have the evidence base behind that to say why we're doing it, that it's not just, you know, trying to tick a box. There's a real good, solid reason why we're asking people to make those difficult choices. I think we need to take the time to get it right, and I think we need to make sure that we set really clear objectives about where we're trying to get to and how we think we're going to get there. And I think finally as well, you know, the just transition, we hear so much about that in terms of climate change, but it is so critical in terms of marine recovery that we are really thinking particularly about those coastal communities, how we bring, we've had an amazing session with Young Sea Changers, but how we bring young people, particularly from those coastal communities, with us and listen to those voices to make sure that any plans we're making, any policies we're making, we're really bringing everyone together.
Thanks very much, Kate. We come to our second question, and I'm going to ask Callum to ask that, and very importantly, it's about pollution. I hope I've got that right.
Yes, thanks, Claudia. Thank you. Declared an interest, Callum Wick from Marine Conservation Society. Issue very close to my heart. We're asking this on behalf of everybody that asked ahead of it. Very much in the account that we heard earlier, in the Young at Heart camp, I've got the bluebells going around my head now. So there's a joke for folk who know that song. Anyway, land and sea are often managed separately, yet the connections are clear. From untreated sewage and agricultural runoff to plastics and industrial nodules, pollution flows from source to sea and undermines both ecosystems and communities. How will your party align terrestrial and marine management so that approaches complement each other, tackle pollution at its source, and deliver cleaner, healthier waters?
Push it the right way. Thanks very much, Callum, and first to Connor.
Thanks very much, Claudia. Thank you, Callum, for your great question. So, as I've already said, Scottish Labour recognises that pollution does not stop at the shoreline, and neither can our policies. We plan to take that source-to-sea approach, aligning marine management so that regulators and agencies can work together, so not in isolation, not in silos. We will end the routine discharge of untreated sewage and tackle agricultural runoff through better enforcement and investment. in green infrastructure like wetlands and buffer zones, and we'll also make sure to hold industries accountable for the plastic chemical pollution that begins on land but then goes on to damage our seas. We'll expand nature-based solutions, restoring seagrass meadows, salt marshes and oyster beds, naturally filtered pollutants whilst also storing carbon. Clean water should be a basic right, not a luxury, and they will make sure Scotland's rivers and seas reflect this, whilst also supporting the coastal communities and fishing industry alongside that. I have many colleagues who have been talking about plastic pollution, the impact of sewage when we have extreme rain, when rivers are not properly monitored, and these are issues my Labour MSP colleagues have been raising with Scottish Water as more action is needed to make our water and sewage facilities more resilient as we continue to get more extreme weather and flooding. Like one example of another colleague is my colleague Chris Murray MP, who's been campaigning on this issue with Surfers Against Sewage, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, as we need to do more as well to make sure our beaches are safe for everyone, for people going swimming or surfing, or the wildlife that also lives in the water too. And I'd also like to just quickly mention another one of my colleagues, Monica Lennon, MSP, and the work she's been doing on the Reefers Hill too. Thank you.
And Kate.
Thank you. So I think this is such a complex question. There's so many elements of it. So obviously we need to do the kind of obvious thing, which is removal of marine plastics. And that has to be a priority, but also prevention is so critical. So looking upstream, as Conor said, around the pollution that's coming from the land. For me, I think there's a few. When I was thinking about this question, actually, there's a few things that I think we need to be quite clear about. I think sometimes we put a lot of emphasis on individuals, like, oh, it's amazing if community groups go out and do this, or it's amazing if when people are shopping, they make different choices. And I think that's helpful, and I love when people do that, but I don't think we should be relying on that. I think we have to take, again, it's about a leadership approach. Like, I know that in my local supermarket, for example, often you can't buy vegetables without them being wrapped in plastic. Do you know you should be able to go and buy vegetables without having to contribute to pollution? So I think we have to think kind of long term about how we are reducing single-use plastic and putting that emphasis not on individuals but on the businesses. Now obviously there's challenges in that we are in a cost of living crisis. We don't want to put up costs for food for people, so we have to be careful about how we make these decisions. But we need to show leadership, and again I think Scotland can and does show leadership in these areas, and we can continue to do that. So if we're thinking actually we want to put pressure on supermarkets to reduce packaging, these kind of things. I mean, obviously there's so much in this. There's the deposit return scheme that we need to see come in. There's, I think, more work that needs to be done around fishing litter and lost gear, and oftentimes as well we're looking at things being like a voluntary thing, which is great because there's lots of fishers and industries that are happy to buy into these things, but it's not really enough, because what you end up with is the good guys, the ones that want to help, end up actually having higher costs. It's less sustainable for them. There's always going to be some people that aren't volunteering to sign up to better standards, and actually end up penalising the good guys. So I do think we need to look at how do we put in more regulation and really make sure that we're levelling the playing field in these areas.
Thanks very much, Kate. And over to you, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks, Callum. Yes, and we know that about 80% of pollution in marine environments comes from the land, so it's obviously crucial that we find ways to tackle that. But of course, we've got lots of different kinds of pollution, which then needs a multifaceted approach, because obviously domestic plastic will need a completely different approach to agricultural runoffs, for example. But let me just highlight two distinct Lib Dem policies in this area. Firstly, on sewage. Liberal Democrats have been really clear we want to see a Clean Water Act that would protect our coastal waters from sewage. And that would see Scotland's Victorian sewage system updated, every sewage dump monitored, and there be strict binding targets for their reduction. We would bring in a blue flag system for Scotland's rivers and a complete ban on the release of any sewage in protected areas such as bathing waters. In my own ward in Edinburgh, I work really closely with swimmers and local activists to get SEPA to test the water regularly and to get bathing water status, which we got in 2023. I think that's a really good example of how communities can work together for real tangible results, and also create this sense of ownership of our own marine environments. And of course, sewage is not just harmful to people. Raw sewage includes harmful forever chemicals and microplastics, hugely damaging to the ocean in many ways. And just very briefly, secondly, on plastic pollution, we need to eliminate single-use, non-recyclable plastic as much as possible to reduce marine litter, among other things, and replace them with affordable alternatives. We committed to bringing in a circular economy law in our 2021 Scottish Manifesto. We backed the circular economy bill that passed in 2024. And we need to finally implement a workable deposit return scheme. Very finally, Lib Dems are internationalists. We support the ratification of the BBNJ, the UN High Seas Treaty, and its implementation, and a global plastics treaty to cut plastic pollution worldwide.
Thanks, Samila. Come to Ariane.
Thanks. Well, the early part of this session with Greens in government, we did do our very best to try to get a deposit return scheme brought in, and unfortunately there was a bit of a political play there, sadly, but it looks like we will hopefully get something in as a UK-wide process. But I just put that out to show that Scottish Greens have been working really hard on that, and that was led by Rona Slater. We've got the ban on single-use plastics. We've got work being done on vapes, and generally our kind of underlying approach for the party is around a polluter pays approach. So how can we kind of get the manufacturers and get it really upstream, that thinking really well about what they're doing with packaging or the materials that they're using to actually make things, so we can actually build in that cradle to cradle circular economy approach. And on the kind of chemical pollution and land-based agricultural problems with nitrogen, so the Scottish Greens brought in regenerative agriculture. We would not be talking about regenerative agriculture without Scottish Greens in the room during the Butte House Agreement. So that's so important. One word has changed the conversation, and also we're pushing for a move towards organics, which of course will remove nitrogen use. Another thing that I really have been working a lot on is salmon farming, and I think salmon farming both pollutes in plastics but also puts a lot of chemicals into different forms of chemicals into our water. I think it's appalling that should be the case, that should be allowed, and we're not really able to document that properly. So I would like to see a moratorium on salmon farming, and they are asked to clean up when they close down farms, that they're actually asked to clean up because their community is left to do that. The other thing I would love to see is that we actually get fishing gear tagged so that we can find the person who's lost their fishing gear. And wouldn't it be great if we implemented a Norway-style national cleanup where everybody gets out and pulls that marine stuff out of the water? Let's do that together.
Thanks, Ariane. So now we come to question 3, which is about work with young people. And I'm looking for Louis, if I pronounced it right. Great.
Hi there. Is that working? Yeah. Louis from Young Future in Scotland. So young people have told us that they don't feel listened to in decisions on Scotland seas. So how will your party ensure that young people have a real, meaningful say in shaping marine policy beyond token consultation?
Thanks very much, Louis. Really important question. And I'll come to Kate first.
Thanks, Claudia, and thanks, Louis, for the question. For me, one of the most important things about consultation is that you engage people at the right point in decision making, because what I think becomes tokenistic is when you kind of made the decisions and then you go out to say, could you take a look at this? I think actually getting young people around the table really early on is important, so that they're not just giving feedback on something that's already happened, they're actually starting to shape that conversation right from the very beginning. And I think it's also important that young people are around the table with all the other stakeholders with equal status. I mean, again, in the meeting that we had just before this, I was so impressed by how much knowledge, understanding young people had, and they deserve to be listened to. They have really, really a high level of expertise, and that young people care about what happens. They have such a stake in our future, because it's so much more of our future than it is of older people. They've got so much longer, and we have to listen to that. It's so obvious how much passion and how much care young people have, and I think young people have been absolute leaders on climate change, on changing the conversation, and they just have to be shown that respect. For me, there's an opportunity as well around, you know, we're talking and we're acknowledging those difficult conversations, particularly around coastal communities with fishers. Actually, if you're reaching young people in coastal communities, in families where there's a history and a tradition of fishing, you're speaking to them, we're talking also about ocean literacy, you're having those conversations, and young people can then really influence the older generations. I had an example in my ward, slightly different but relating to cycling infrastructure, where young people were really involved in the design of the scheme. Older people came to complain about it. They wanted an extra 2 lanes of car road, and young people wanted cycle lanes. But when we said, actually, it's your young people, it's not the council doing this to you, it's your young people that want this, it really changes the conversation. So I think respecting that. And finally, sorry Claudia, outcomes. Young people getting involved, having a say, saying what matters to them, and then seeing that that's changed things is so critical, and that's why people give up their time. Thank you.
And over to Colin.
Thanks very much, Claudia. This is my favourite question of the night. As I said, I've led a lot of youth and early career focus groups, being early career ocean professionals, Sustainable Ocean Alliance in the UK, engagement with the UK National Decade Committee. I personally know how hard the fight is not only to get your voices in the room, but to get them heard, and also make sure it's actually reflected in policy, and it's reflected in what is changed. So fantastic question, and one that we should always be asking with all decisions, how we are engaging young people, how youth has that voice. Labour feels strongly that young people are not just the future of Scotland Seas, need to engage with them now, as I said, and make sure those voices are shaping it today. We want to ensure that youth engagement isn't tokenism. We want to ensure that it's meaningful and has an impact. So we'll establish structured youth advisory panels linked to different government departments, ensuring young people's input directly informs decisions as well as legislation. And we'll fund outreach and digital engagement so that young people from island and coastal communities and those facing financial barriers can meaningfully participate in that process. There's no point having a process where only some can engage with it. It has to be accessible for all. Labour has always shown it listens to young people, from shaping climate education policy to supporting youth-led campaigns for our cleaner coast. And we want that marine policy built with young people, not simply presented to them. And Young Sea Changes Scotland's manifesto is being read by Labour MPs like Sarah, who prioritise listening to young people, as it's going to be our generation's future that's going to have to deal with this, it's going to have to tackle this into the future and beyond. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin, and over to Ariane.
Thanks. Summer 2022, I had a wonderful time in an MPA in Ullapool with the Ullapool Sea Savers. So how do I ensure that young people's voices are heard? I go out and I listen to them, and I see the amazing things that they're doing, and they are absolutely totally inspiring. And one of the things that I loved is that they've got this new boat where people in wheelchairs, so they take people who, they create accessibility for the ocean by getting people in wheelchairs out on the sea. And in the MPA that they go and they do all the cleaning up that we've been talking about in the previous question. So that's one way, is going and listening. And I think there's also another amazing group, the Rural Youth Action Network, that formed out of the Scottish Rural Island Parliament. And they are going great guns, and again, going and listening to what they have to say has been really important for me. Something else that I experienced recently was the Murray Climate Action Network had their conference recently, and what they had right there in the space was a panel for young people responding to every single session that was presented, and I thought that was a really powerful thing that I would love to see happening more. The other thing that was really powerful for me was last week in the Parliament, we had a young person speaking at the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee so powerfully, and that person is in the room, not to embarrass them, but they were so powerful, and I think that really showed MSPs in the room that actually young people know what they're talking about. They need to be at the table in committees and talking, and the government always watches what committees do, so hopefully the government will pick up on that as well. No, yeah.
Great, thank you. And I love the idea of youth panels, and if that's not something that's part of our manifestos, it's something I'm definitely keen to discuss. But I think it's also really important that we integrate young voices with other groups, so we don't silo young people, and older people, and so on. I think that can sometimes be a little bit unhelpful. I think one way to give young people a real voice on policy would be to give all 16 and 17-year-olds the ability to vote in all elections in the UK, because we know that young people are incredibly engaged with the future of our climate and our environment, as well as many, many other issues, and we need to hear those voices. I'm also part of a party, Liberal Democrats. We make policy, our members make policy, so that is another path in which you could really directly influence policy. Our members write motions, they speak at conferences, and they are heard by decision makers at all levels. So if that is something that you're interested in, I definitely encourage you to think about that. But in our 2024 General Election Manifesto, we committed to establishing national and local citizens' assemblies to give people around the country involvement in decisions on policy. So a climate change assembly would engage with a representative section of the population, including young people. And we also want to give the Scottish Youth Parliament a greater role in shaping policy and reviewing public services used by young people. It was really, really great to meet with the young sea changers earlier, and I would be very, very happy to continue that engagement. And something that I personally do, and we talked about in the session earlier, is I go into primary schools in my area, in my ward, with a really big planning map, and I talk to the primary sevens about what they would like the city to look like when they grow up, how they move around, what they will, their housing would look like, and what their green spaces would look like. So one of the things I will be doing now is start to talk about what they would like their coastal areas to look like, because what I would really like is for them to feel that their opinions matter, that they can think about it, and that they are heard, and that they continue to be heard as they grow up.
Thanks very much, Sammy. And I'm going to ask the panel a question now, which has come from quite a few different people and been collated by Sea Scotland, and it's about fisheries. And fishing activities have been touched on already, but for a bit more detail, please, from the panellists. It has been identified as one of the key pressures on Scotland's marine environment, but the industry is also vital for Scotland's coastal communities, food security and culture as well. And recent public discussion highlights a desire to better manage damaging fishing activities such as bottom-toed trawling. What do you consider to be the main priorities for managing Scotland's fishing sector to ensure the marine environment can recover and coastal communities in the future can also have jobs? Thank you. And going to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Claudia. Well, I said this earlier, but the main priority is getting the MPAs turned from paper parks into actually properly managed plans. And ideally, I'm not 100% happy about the MPAs on the offshore that we've seen that came through last week. So proper management plans and enforcement. I want to see compliance, and so I'd like to see a restructuring. Scottish Greens wants to see a restructuring of the Marine Directorate and actually really have a much better, strong compliance and enforcement body. I think we need to increase fines from £2,000 to a lot more, because right now people can just put that in as a cost of, there is no consequence for that kind of fine that's given out. The other thing that I think we need to do is, and this has already been happening in Shetland with some of the work, the making waves work, is this working with the fishers, because it seems to me that we've got this policy, and I mentioned these different bits of legislation and policy, but when I talk to fishermen, they don't really know why that's there. They may know that they need to kind of get licenses for this and that, but they don't really know. So I think more of this kind of common ground forum style making waves work, where we're talking together, with the really good work of the Scottish Wildlife Trust in the community voices that they did in Orkney, where they're getting everybody talking together. I think that really would be important. Another thing that I would love to see happen is that we actually involve independent scientists. So over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with some incredible scientists, And they're not government scientists, they're independent, and they're bringing a really important perspective that absolutely needs to be acknowledged. So we need to be tackling the bottom toe here, as I talked about. We need to be addressing the bycatch issues. And this is something that was the Scottish Creel Fishermen's Federation has actually called for. They want to see a limit on the number of creels that get dropped. So we absolutely need to be moving towards sustainable fisheries, especially in the inshore. So sustainable amount of creels and also hand-dyed scallops and that kind of work that allows the inshore to recover. I think the critical thing is getting the inshore to recover, because what we want, I think everyone in the room wouldn't go against the idea that we really want to see fisheries around for 50, 100, maybe even 1,000 years. So we want that. How do we get there? We get there by looking after the ecosystem.
Thanks, Ariane. Come over to Sammy.
Thank you. Yeah, there's not much there that I would disagree with. I think we need to take steps to protect our marine environment, but also make sure that there is a future for our fishing industries, which it's obviously vital for the UK and Scottish economies and the livelihoods of the people that depend on them. I agree, unsustainable, damaging fishing practices must end. Live Dems want to see an end to the bottom trawling in vulnerable habitats, and we must have a real clear focus, underpinned again by science, on the recovery and sustainable management of depleted fish stocks. We do believe that rather than employing a top-down approach, it's vital that governments work with the fishing industry so that we can find solutions that both protect the marine environment and ensure the viability of the industry. I think some trust has been lost, and I think there's some work to be done to really work with these communities and make sure that engagement is meaningful and not a token exercise. And what I would like to see is for those communities to be helped to transition to low impact sustainable methods. One thing we could look at is changing the fishing quota allocation system to reward the most sustainable fleets. We want to see sustainable catch limits that are underpinned again by the science, rather than a blanket approach that doesn't take into account local factors. And finally, building on what I said earlier, it's my view that the government needs to fund the science that underpins an evidence-based approach to marine spatial planning, so that fishing communities understand where they stand in terms of their future.
Great, thanks, Sammy. And where am I? Kate.
Yeah, so I think we're sort of dangerously close to agreeing on a lot of things. For me, where we do see fishing practices that are damaging, then particularly where we can see that there's an impact on protected marine features, then we need to stop those damaging practices. I think, as has been said by other panellists, it's really important that there's data that underpins that, because we need to make sure that the fishers, that the fishing industry, people understand why decisions are being made. And so actually having that very clear and robust data to explain why we're trying to make the decisions that we are. It is about meeting conservation objectives. We are able to map what damage is being done is really critical, and I think that's how we get buy-in. And the Scottish Government have spent £22 million on enforcement, and I think that has to continue, but it also has to be alongside a very sort of robust and happy conversation where we're bringing people in and listening to each other. Obviously, reducing bycatch is critical, and I think, again, having those conversations with the fisheries industry about how we support innovation, so how we're looking at developing more selective fishing gear, how we're looking at improving fishing gear so that we reduce the impact on habitat is critical, and also, again, the collection of fishing litter. So it's about those conversations with the fisheries industry, but also they have to be incentivised, and it has to be a positive conversation, and we have to make sure we are being very clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And also, as well, I think it's really important that we're recording and making sure there's obligations to record discarded fish, so that we are, again, gathering that data and understanding the impacts.
Thanks very much. And Connor.
Thanks very much, Claudia, and thank you for the questions. So I know I've already touched on this a little bit with some of my other answers, so just to build from them. Scotland's fishing industry, as we know, sustains communities, our culture and food security, but it does depend on having that healthy marine environment. That's why Scottish Labour's priority is to secure that long-term sustainability, ensuring that recovery of marine ecosystems goes hand in hand with a thriving fishing sector. So we support the full rollout of remote electronic monitoring across all vessels to ensure transparency and accountability, protecting both honest fishers and the wider environment. We'll strengthen inshore fisheries management to give local voices greater power over how their waters are used and ensure fair spatial planning between fishers, renewables and conservation. Our vision is a sector that is low impact, high value and most of all rooted in fairness, where coastal communities lead the recovery of Scotland's seas. And we're currently undertaking a swathe of stakeholder meetings for our manifesto right now. Sarah's actually already had 3 with marine and ocean focus groups, so we're also making sure that those different representatives are being heard too. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Colin. And I've got another question, which is actually about ocean literacy. And that has been touched on by everybody already, I think, and it shows how important it is. But just to build on that, a question has been put in to say, young people have told us, Young Sea Changers Scotland, that a lack of education and use of technical jargon make it hard to understand or engage with marine policy issues. And many others across Scotland's communities also face these same barriers to engaging with marine policy. Will your party support ocean and climate education becoming part of the national curriculum? And for those out with the education system, will your party prioritise the development of ocean literacy across Scotland? So it's sort of twofold, about within school and out with the education system as well. And who am I going to first now? Sally, please.
Thank you. So for me, it's an absolute no-brainer that it is important to teach people about the importance of climate, the importance of nature, and the importance of ocean as part of that conversation. To be honest, I would have expected that to have already been part of the national curriculum. So to hear in our earlier session people say that it wasn't was actually really, really disappointing to me. And well, I don't think I'm in a position to commit to that here and now. What I can commit to is to take this up with the people who will be writing our manifesto for the Scottish elections next year. So you have that commitment from me. For me, learning about the importance of the ocean is a vital part of the conversation about climate. I was really pleased that my colleague, Councillor Savage, brought the Ocean for the Motion to Edinburgh City Council. We're pleased to support that. We're especially excited about the ocean literacy element for school children. Somebody said to me recently that there's no voters in the ocean. And that's really stuck with me, because nobody would say the same about climate change or emissions. We all know the importance of reducing our emissions, but too few people understand what the role that ocean plays as a carbon sink, in the way ocean regulates weather patterns, or how every second breath that we take, the oxygen is produced in the ocean by phytoplankton. So unless we all suddenly stop breathing, the ocean is actually part of us all the time. And a lot of people simply don't think about that. And it's hard to care about something that you don't know about. So yes, I think ocean literacy is hugely important.
Thanks, Sammy. And Connor.
Thanks very much, Claudia. So with my motion for the ocean, I'm very proud to say that all the political groups represented up here all voted in favour of it when it came to the full council. Obviously, we do have a notable exception. And I do remember that during their retort to say why they wouldn't be voting for the motion, they did actually question the concept of ocean literacy and what it meant and whether or not it was something meaningless. Obviously, I firmly disagree with that sentiment. As if people don't understand what's at stake, they can't take part in protecting it. Labour supports making ocean climate education a core part of the national curriculum, ensuring every young person learns about Scotland's seas, climate and biodiversity. But we also recognise that the learning doesn't stop in school, We'll work with communities, museums and local organisations to build ocean literacy for all using plain language and accessible materials. We'll back initiatives that demystify marine policy so everyone, from young people to fishers to local business, can have a say in how our seas are managed, as I've said. And Scotland's marine future depends on an informed, engaged public, and they will make sure no one is left out of that conversation. And Young Sea Changers Scotland is doing a fantastic job of making sure the public remains engaged. And just to add to this as well, I would implore all of you to please reach out to your councillors, your MSPs, your MPs, as well as the candidates in the Holyrood elections next year about your views on this topic we're covering right now, as well as all of us, to make sure your voices are being heard and listened to, so that you can have a meaningful impact as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Over to Ariane.
Well, the great news is that in June 2023, the Learning for Sustainability curriculum got rolled out, or started to be rolled out through all of Scotland's schools. So that's about climate change, but Learning for Sustainability gives us that hook to then go, hey, let's expand that into marine literacy. So that is already happening. I think some of it is about encouraging teachers. That's what my sense of it. All the work I'm doing is about trying to find the teacher who really wants to take that forward, because we do have this curriculum for excellence that can create a scenario where you can't necessarily go, you must teach this. So there's the work to be done there. But one of the things I'd like to see is marine literacy, but how about ecosystem literacy? Let's take it to that next level. We've already talked this evening about how the terrestrial and the marine is totally intertwined, and we've got rivers that connect both. So getting people to understand that interconnectivity, that if you throw a piece of waste or put a chemical on the soil, it is going to end up impacting the sea. I think the other thing that would be fantastic, because I certainly have gone through a whole learning curve around pelagic and demersal and inshore and offshore and all of those things. And actually, people used to say to me, it is complicated, but actually, if you can see pictures of what demersal and pelagic looks like, it's really actually quite straightforward. I think the other thing I would love to see happening is that we start to embrace the idea of planetary boundaries. So Johan Rockström's idea, because that's not just about climate, it's ocean acidification, all these things that we're going to overshoot, and entwine that with the work of Kate Raworth. So really teaching around donut economics, so please go check that out if this is a new term for you. But I think we need to find an economic model that sits at the bottom, that young people understand, that so underpins what we're doing in our environment, an economic model that actually puts environment at the heart, so that when young people go through school and leave school and get a job, they're actually going into an economic system that says the environment is actually the primary thing and the economy sits within it. And one of the other thing is, as an MSP, I'm 100% keen to do the jargon busting, and I've already talked to Alan about that. I certainly could help in terms of helping people, and also welcoming people to the Parliament. So the Parliament is the People's Parliament. Young people should come in, and you get an education coming and watching a committee.
Thanks. Great. Thanks very much, Ariane and Kate.
Thank you, Claudia. So yeah, I mean, on the jargon and the acronyms, like it's so alienating, and I think just in terms of politics in general, we need to just speak in plain language. And I think people do feel alienated from politics at the moment, and I think a huge part of that is actually how we communicate. So yes, 100% for me, better communication. So we did pass Connor's wonderful motion for the ocean in August, and a couple of things that really, there was a few asks for the council to do, and one of the things that really jumped out for me as something that I thought, wow, that is really amazing, is for pupils to experience the ocean. The council ward that I represent is Portobello, Craigmillar. Craigmillar and Lidry is one of the areas of highest levels of multiple deprivation in Edinburgh, and it is, you understand sometimes that children in particular really miss out on a lot of opportunities. If you've never been to the sea, then you don't really understand how the things that you do or the choices you make might have that impact. And the other thing is, my God, the sea's amazing, isn't it? Like, it's so good for you. Oh, the microphone doesn't like that. It's so good for you. And like for me, I know when I've had difficult times in my life, just going and walking on a beach can be one of the most restorative things. And for children who've not experienced that, to go and experience it is so important. a lot of these choices are, as Ariane said, they're not necessarily for government to legislate. It is about councils making those choices, but you can have those conversations with, or even in some cases with schools, but you can have those conversations, you can set an agenda and say this is something that we think is important. And so I think that is really critical. Also, the motion asks for the council to use the council's website to share information and to make people more aware of the ocean and the impacts of pollution and the things that they can do to try and help marine conservation. So I hope that's something that we'll see certainly here in Edinburgh because the motion passed. For me, again, it's just if we want to make changes, then we need people to want those changes because politics, it reacts to what people want. So people are telling politicians or the political parties, writing to them and saying, this is what we want to see in the manifesto. That's how you affect change. And we need lots of people doing that, and we get lots of people doing that by making sure everyone understands what's important and why it matters. So yeah, absolutely critical.
Thanks very much, Kate. And everyone's kept to time really well, with the ruthless chair, of course. What it would be good to do, as we've got just a few minutes, is just to give all the panellists a minute or two, just going along, starting with Sammy and going along the line, in case there's anything that any of you feel, that you really wanted to highlight that you didn't because it wasn't covered by a question or you didn't have time or anything like that. So putting you on the spot, I know, but just opening it up and asking perhaps somebody if you'd like to start. And if you don't want to, if you just want to sum up or whatever.
Yeah, I just think it's been really, really interesting actually to see how much we actually agree on as political parties, and I think that's something to remember as we're going into an election where people try to draw out differences, because that is politics. But ultimately, this is about making a difference and about getting things done. And so I think we should embrace areas where we can work together, because ultimately that's what people want us to do, right? We want to make a difference, we want to make change. So let's look at the areas where we do agree and make a difference that way, and engage as many people as possible who have either lived experience or have something to say about it. Just let's make things a little bit better.
Trust. I think we're all saying lots of good stuff. But I think there's something that, why are things moving so slowly? And I think there's something about trust that needs to happen with the sector. And I mentioned the work of the Scottish Wildlife Trust Community Voices work and the work in Making Waves work. I think we need to roll that out. Something I've brought up to Mary Goujon time and time again, and it's not just in the marine space, it's across rural Scotland as well, is conflict. It's everywhere, and it's coming up in part because we're having to change. And we're having to change very quickly because we didn't embrace, we didn't really get behind the change that needed to happen maybe 30 years ago. So there's something there for me about how do we create that forum where really everyone is genuinely in the same space talking, and so I would love to see the Scottish Government roll out funding for what I'm calling soft infrastructure, which is basically acknowledging we need to fund conflict resolution or evolution, people who have that skill to sit in the heat with those difficult conversations, and get that out of the work of Marine Directorate, because my sense is that people in those roles are not necessarily skilled to facilitate the tension that sits in that space when you've got NGOs and the sector in there together. And that, to me, is what's holding things up, because the ideas are all there, we know what we need to do, but something is blocking. And I think it's about building those relationships and having everyone together in that space. So I say that's really a critical piece for me, is that, and working on some kind of better governance structure, governance of the seas that includes everybody.
Thanks very much, Ariane. And Kate.
Thanks again, Claudia. And I suppose just to say thank you for putting on this evening, for everyone coming this evening. For me, it's been actually really an opportunity to learn a lot. I mean, particularly what you just said, Ariane. I think that's a great idea, looking at conflict resolution, because for me, it feels like that is where, that's one of the questions that come up is why are we not making the progress that we're all sitting here, there's no Conservatives here, so we all agree we want to move forward as quickly as possible. So why are we having those struggles, and I think it is about the divergent views and how we bring people together. So actually, that's something that I'll certainly take back. I would say right now we are certainly the SNP are in the process of writing our manifesto. So if you do have specific things that you think actually I would really like this to be considered to be included, then please do get in touch. I'm going to, after the amazing session we had before, actually sort of request that we can put the young sea changers directly in contact with the person who's writing the SNP manifesto to have that kind of meeting and discussion and see what are the things that are really critical that we need to get in. I think it is really important that all of the parties, or at least all of the parties, get behind the promises that we've made, the commitments that we have. I think we all want the same thing, and it's about how we make sure that they are a priority in our manifestos, and we're putting the resources behind them to make sure that we can deliver on them.
Thank you very much. It's been absolutely fantastic to be part of this historic event tonight, and I just want to thank you all for your great questions and the engagement you've brought to the room. It's so encouraging to see so many people who care, campaign, and work in this space with us here tonight. I'd leave you with 2 points. Do not underestimate the impact you can have, especially our young people. Go out and see what you can do. And to echo the final points of my previous answer, please reach out to your councillors, your MSPs, your MPs to express your own views on these topics, as well as the candidates for next year's Holyrood elections, to make sure this stays at the top of the agenda, make sure this stays at the top of discussions, and make sure your voices are heard. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Conor. And just before I extend some thanks to the panel, I just want to point out that there is some time, I think, is it until 9 o'clock, for networking and sharing ideas and relaxing a bit, perhaps, at the end of a long day, long evening, all together. And it's been great that all of you have been able to attend as well. So thank you very much for that, and thanks again to the sponsors, without which it wouldn't have been possible. There is an Explore the Words of the Wild exhibition, which I still have to get to, and it's demonstrating shortlisted entries to the Trust's 2025 Source to Sea Nature writing competition. Is that the Scottish Wildlife Trust? The Trust? Yeah, someone's nodding. Okay, good. So enjoy the rest of your evening. And I do really want to extend a very robust thank you to all the panelists for their grasp of the situation, having, if I may say so, been very involved in marine issues in the last Parliament, and very passionate about them, which is probably why I'm now chair of Young Sea Changers, possibly partly why. And all your, I know it's a Hustings, but your, how can I say this, sounds so patronising, I'm going to say it anyway, your maturity of if you like what someone else has done, whatever it is, then you're quite comfortable with saying so. And that gives me hope, really strong hope for the next Parliament, because there will be some of you and some others who are prepared to work together. And things really happen in our Scottish Parliament when 2 or 3 parties see there's an amendment to a bill that will make it stronger, or there's something in committee that they really have to probe, and people work together. Of course, there are challenges, and parties need to challenge each other, and members need to make sure that the parties get their manifestos out for the marine environment as far as possible. But I think, I hope you all agree with me that it has been a heartening and inspiring and informative evening. And thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.
I know that it's, that it's your studies and it's quite busy, but it'd be really nice to pencil a chat, even for Christmas, because I think like after all the engagement we've had this summer, and then I know, and we're starting to work on this. Basically, as part of the project, we're committing to making this digital literacy toolkit, which will be basically an online kind of digital